In this video, I'll show you 4 different patterns or textures you can use in your left hand when writing for solo piano. Now, I'm not going to turn you into Rachmaninoff in like 10 minutes, but if you're coming from a place where maybe you have a melody and chords and you're just not sure what to do in the left hand, or you are writing for piano already, but you just keep using the same patterns over and over and over, you should get some ideas here about some different things you can do, and also maybe how to make those choices and how to decide where to use what and when. So before you even start writing, you should probably ask yourself, why do you even need a left hand part? Is it because you need harmony? Is it because you need some sort of rhythmic motion or to fill gaps? Or just because you think you're supposed to have one? A lot of times your melody might be very busy, it might be very rhythmically active, and you don't really need the left hand to support the rhythm there. And sometimes you might be covering all your chord tones in the melody too, so you don't really need the left hand to be covering the harmony. So before you even start writing a left hand part, ask yourself, what am I trying to get it to do? Why do I even need it there? And sometimes you might not need it at all, and sometimes you might realize, okay, I need something very simple, or I need something a little busier. But if you can actually think about before you start writing, before you just sit down at the piano and just start banging away, or just laying down block chords, actually think about, okay, what am I trying to actually achieve here? So there are 4 basic textures I'm going to go over today. They are the simple line, block chords, the stride pattern or Oom-pah-pah pattern, and arpeggios. So all of the examples I'm going to use in this video, I'm actually pulling out of the book The Disney Collection, and I chose that for a couple of reasons. One is because there's a wide variety of textures being used in the book, so I was able to find an example for everything. All the pieces are in here are for just one single solo piano playing, and all the pieces are melody and chords, so they're coming from kind of a lead sheet space. A lot of ways that I usually write something, the first step is the melody and chords, and usually you can get that far and then you're trying to figure out, okay, how do I actually apply that to the piano? The first is the single line, and that really is what it sounds like. It's just one note in the left hand. That could be a bass line, it could be a counterline, but the idea is that it's not chords, it's not harmony. You could pluck it out with one finger if you really had to. So to start, let's actually look at an example. So this example I have here is the work song from Cinderella, and you can see in the bass line it is a single line for most of the piece. Here it is root, 5th, 6th, 5th, and that's really just a neighbor tone over the D. So it's root, 5th, root, 5th, root 7th, root 7th. It's only until this measure here that we actually have 2 notes happening at a time. And it's not a coincidence. When you listen to it, you'll hear this is a cadence. So having that extra note there, that third, is punctuating the cadence, and it's giving us a nice little mark for that structural moment. Then the only other exception here is these guys, this 2-note voicings. And I think the main reason for that is because if you could see the A minor, D, A minor, D, it's almost like a stutter here. There's like this repeating 2 bars kind of happening over and over. And I think that just breaks up the 2 bars. And then here we come into parallel 6ths, all the way driving into the cadence. And if you look at the chord symbols, they don't even necessarily match what you're seeing there. The left hand is really just being used as a parallel 6th voice, a way to harmonize and add some pretty color to that melody line. I think the chords are pretty well implied, that you don't even need the bass line there to understand what's going on. Also notice the match in the cadence down here. That double note, just like we had here, the double note is helping with the punctuation on the structural point. So we have that one little extra note there. So why the single line? Why does it work on this piece? Well, I think the main reason is it's very fast. You can see the half note is 140 BPM, and it's very light. And the right hand is very busy. It's a lot of notes. It doesn't take a lot of time to rest. So we already have a very active line in the right hand, and the thing is supposed to be very light and nimble and fast moving. If we had big, thick, clunky chords going on in the left hand, it would probably slow us down and drag us down. Keeping it on that single line actually helps keep it flowing and light. So let's take a listen to this. So I think a lot of times people might be a little shy of using just one note in the left hand. They might think that's not good enough, or that they're going to be missing something. They're not going to be getting enough chord tones, or they're not going to be getting enough rhythm or something. So hopefully this shows, I think this is a good example of how it can be nimble and light and perfectly sufficient to have a single line in the left hand. And there's a few other moments in other examples where there's that single line happening as well. And it's usually pretty effective. It's pretty good. I think the only drawback to the single line is if you were going for something grander and bigger and a much fuller sound, then no, you're not going to get that with just the single line. You're going to have to look at some of the other textures that we're going to use. So the next texture is block chords. And really this just means a single chord chunked under the left hand. All the notes of a triad usually, or a seventh chord, just right there. The nice thing about the block chord is you get all the harmony notes, and you also have a lot of room to do things with the rhythm. So you could have a pulsing rhythm, or you could come up with some sort of groove or some sort of accented pattern. Really, it's very open. There's a lot you can do with block chords, as simple as it may seem. Some of the drawbacks to block chords is that after a while, it could start to feel kind of clunky and heavy-handed, and I think you might get a little tired of it if you did it for your whole piece. But for certain sections, I think it works really well. So let's look at some of the examples. First one I have also comes from Cinderella. It's Bippity Boppity Boo, and look at the left hand where we have this block chord pattern going on, especially that bass line in the bottom. Adds a nice little melodic moment. And then if you look in bar 3 here, we break away from that chord pattern into single line, a lot like what we saw before. I think this might be a stylistic move because this is, like I said, this is the same composers as Cinderella. So they're going into these 6 again. It's probably something that they tend to like to do. But when we listen to it, you will hear it's really refreshing, has a really nice flowing sound to it. And then he accents these notes back with the block chords. So the block chords give us some strength in contrast to that flowing line. And then at the end here, we have the arpeggio, which is a texture we'll get to later, but it's really just kind of like a little fill. It's a little color thing at the end there. The main thing we want to listen to here is just the strong march-like quality we get by having these block chords. Okay, so for the next example, it comes from Bambi. It's Little April Shower. And we start with the single note in the bass line in the left hand, just doing roots and fifths, and then we move into the block chords. And so I want to show this as an example of using both textures in a very short amount of time, in only 4 bars, and how it adds some interest and some variety, crossing over what's generally a pretty simple C major diatonic chords, diatonic melody. Using those contrasting single line against chords, I think adds some interest to what otherwise might be a little dry. So let's take a listen to it first. So hear how those block chords really give us kind of this plodding moment, the C, F, C here, bonk, clunk, clunk, which really contrasts with this kind of like do, 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 this little kind of walking, plodding along, happy little thing. I think there's an interesting balance there where we kind of get some motion and then we kind of get a little stillness and then we're back into the motion. Actually, I'm not familiar with this scene in the movie. I can almost imagine that that might be happening with the animals, that maybe they're plodding along and there's a moment of pause and they keep going. Don't quote me on that. I haven't seen Bambi in forever, but that could be what's happening. And then again here, you can see he's using that single line texture as a fill, as a way to add something to be happening in that space where we're otherwise resting in the right hand. So the next example comes from the Jungle Book, The Bare Necessities, and it's again an example of using block chords under the melody line. But what's different here is we're actually using the block chords in the middle between the melody on the top, the bass line on the bottom. Those chords are filling in the space in between. And the other thing you might notice is a lot of these, for the most part, except for a couple exceptions, are in the right hand. So I know in the title or maybe in the thumbnail, I said this was left hand patterns. That was a little bit of a way just to get it clear that I was talking about writing for solo piano. If I had said piano accompaniment, that might have implied that there's vocalists or soloists or something. And really I'm talking about accompanying yourself on the piano. So it was a little bait and switch if I said left hand and some of it's under your right, but hopefully you don't hold it against me that that's actually how a lot of this works. The majority of the examples in the Disney book are using this texture, where you have the melody, the bass line, and the chords in between. The only difference, if you were just doing it in your left hand, is that you're getting some of those available notes in your right. As long as it's within reach of your whole hand, you're perfectly good to do it that way. And it's kind of a step beyond what we were just looking at compared Compared with the Little April Showers, where we had this, we're kind of taking it just one step further. Now we're allowing those chord tones to happen in the right hand. And it's much more active. You're going to hear it's very fluid, but we're still able to get everything we need as far as harmony notes and rhythm. Let's take a listen to this so far. So again, don't worry if you're not a piano player trying to decide what can I do, what actually fits. If you're within an octave, you're going to be able to get that under your hand. And as long as you have 5 notes or less, you're going to have fingers to be able to play it. It helps if you have a keyboard and you can actually try these voicings even at a very slow, just go one chord at a time. You don't have to be able to play at a tempo. But you know, if it feels like you can fit that under your hand, then you're in good shape. Also notice we have that single line happening at the intro in the octaves. That is a really nice way, as I've read before, I think maybe it was about Beethoven using octaves to kind of open the curtain to the beginning of the piece. So we have this strong single-minded octaves, and then it opens up into full chords. And then the other thing we have is some passing tones in the bass note sometimes. So we have this F A to the B flat. We have this F E going down to the D. By separating the chords and the bass a little bit, we have a little more flexibility to make that bass line a bit more melodic. So the next texture is the stride pattern, or the Oom-pah-pah pattern. And this is basically where you play the bass note and then the chords on different beats. So you have this boom, bum, bum, boom, bum, bum, or if you're in 4/4, you might have boom, chunk, boom, chunk. Either way, if you're in 3/4 or 4/4 or something else, you're alternating that bass line with the chords. So the first example I have here is from Mary Poppins' Feed the Birds. We have that oom-pah-pah in the left hand. And really, it's as simple as just taking a 3-note chord like that and just delaying the upper voices a beat. You just play the bass line and then you delay them later. Something to notice is here he breaks the pattern going from quarter notes to a half note, which adds a little contrast. And then here, just like we've seen in a few other places, he's using arpeggio on a single line to add some fill and to add some interest when the melody is done. So the melody is done speaking. We don't want everyone to think, oh, the song's over, or to kind of lose interest. So the left hand is just adding a little bit of a filler to keep our ear engaged during that moment. So some of the good things about the stride pattern is you get the full chord, just like the block chords, but you also get a little more activity and motion by having this driving rhythmic pattern going on. The drawback is that it can sound a bit old-fashioned if you're not using it right. So you have to be careful. In some contexts, that might be exactly what you want. You maybe want to be very clear. This is a waltz, or this is a ragtime piece. I think it could get a little tiresome if you were overusing this pattern though, so be careful that it doesn't sound too just oom-pah in kind of a comical way if that's not what you're going for. And there's another example of this stride pattern from Mary Poppins with A Spoonful of Sugar. So instead of the 3/4 pattern from before, we have a 4/4 pattern this time, which basically is just having the chords hitting beats 2 and beats 4, and it's giving the whole thing almost like a drum beat kind of feel to it. I think it's a little hard to read and a little more complex looking than it actually is because so many of those chords are happening under the right hand. So I have a version of this where I've taken that top line and separated it from the other parts so you can see a little more clearly what that left hand accompaniment pattern is doing. So if we listen to just that on its own, again, it's the same thing as we're just making sure that those chords are going to fit within the octave under the right hand so that we're going to be able to play them. If we look at this one right here, there's just a spread of a 7th, which is perfectly fine. And then same thing here, we have a spread of a 7th. So as long as you're able to grab it under your hand, I think octave is a pretty good rule of thumb of what to do. And even if it's something that maybe you couldn't play in your own sitting, you should believe that it is playable, because even something this complex, if we go back to the other version, even something that like this that looks really busy is fairly playable because all of those chords are within simple reach. So the last pattern is the arpeggio, and simple as it sounds, this is where you just take your block chord and you spread the notes out. You can do close voicings, which is like the first example we'll look at, or you can do more open voicings where you spread them out. The nice thing about the arpeggio is it's very flowing, so it's really good for slower pieces, maybe something a little more romantic, something where you want just a nice lush feel. You get a lot of the benefits of the chords and the block chords because you get all the harmony notes, and you get the benefits of the single line because you have a moving line that sometimes feels like a counterpoint. The problem with it is that it can sound very busy and very complex. So you usually want to use it when your right hand is a bit simpler, when you actually have some space for those arpeggios to be heard. Because if you have a really busy right hand and a really busy left hand doing just something kind of unrelated, it's going to start to be like a mess. So you really want to be intentional of using those arpeggio patterns when you have space for them. So you can see in So This Is Love from Cinderella, these arpeggios are filling the gaps pretty much every time. Every time there's an arpeggio happening, it's because there's room for it in the right hand. We start on these close voicings where it's just filling the triad, going up, and then it goes a little higher because there's room for it to fill in, and then he breaks the pattern here. I think as a contrast for the second phrase, just to kind of keep it interesting, is breaks to an open voicing, and instead of what could have been that, just does it as a half note, and here doubles those half notes, keeps the interest going, keeps things kind of moving along, and then again we're matched with this fill in the left hand on an arpeggio to fill up the space. Okay, and the last example comes from Love is a Song from Bambi, and then the same principles apply here. You can see that the arpeggios are being used to spread out over the spaces, so there's room in this very simple right hand melody for a more complex, busier left hand. Compare this to the bippity boppity boo from the beginning. That wouldn't really work here because it would just be kind of a complex mess. So in this case, we have this very busy, active right hand. We're just going very bump, bump, bump. Keep it very sharp, short, rhythmic left hand, or matching the melody exactly. And then compare that to the Love is a Song, where the melody is super simple, mostly half notes, and it's slow. So there's a lot of room for that left hand to take over for us and be the flowing, moving, active part of it. If you were to take this simple melody and just do block chords at this tempo, things would probably drag along. It would be really dull. I will point out, as I was saying that I was noticing this is actually kind of a double layer technique. The block chords are happening in the right hand while we're being matched with the arpeggios in the left hand. And I don't think there's a lot of overthinking here about like, oh no, am I doubling notes in the left hand that I already have in the right hand? I really think it's, again, that idea of an octave. What's within reach of an octave, and what's, why can't he go an octave down here? Well, because his thumbs would hit each other on the left hand there. Don't overthink it a lot of times. It's just, what fits within the right hand that's not going to get in the way of the left hand. And independently, they both work perfectly well, and then they will work together. And again, the only other thing is, there's little passing notes sometimes here. That's just that single line idea of the bass line is free to be its own melody. And again, a little interest in the cadence where we break. Usually we're heading up, and then we have a moment where we're heading down. Cadences are always that place where you want to have something that's just like a little special, even to that subtle degree, can add just some extra emphasis at that structural moment. So those are the 4 basic patterns that you can use writing for the left hand, sometimes with the right hand involved, for a solo piano. So if you have a melody and chords like in a lead sheet style, take a look at how busy your melody is, what is your tempo, are your chord tones missing, is your rhythmic activity missing, and then you can decide, do you want single line, do you need block chords, do you need a stride pattern, do you want arpeggios? And also remember that in a lot of our examples, they would use multiple patterns from different phrases or sometimes even within a phrase to highlight certain moments. And so if you feel like you're getting a little stuck doing the same thing for too long, you could consider, okay, I'm using a stride pattern here. Maybe I could break into single line for a couple bars to spice things up and move it along. And always remember that those cadences are really important structural moments. So sometimes you want to work backwards from there. You want to decide, what am I going to do when I get to that cadence? If I hit that cadence, am I going to do some sort of fill with arpeggios? And then with that in mind, you might have a better idea of how you're going to get to that fill. Please let me know in the comments your other questions about writing for piano or what other instruments you want to write for. If you want to see another video where I talk about writing for specific instruments, I have this one where I talk about writing for cello, viola, and violin. And I'll see you in the next one.